when you look at the list of league MVPs over history. I say this with respect to Jokic. Historically speaking, he would be the worst one we've had in 35 years. I took my time to do research, study, care about league MVP for 70 years of NBA history. And now it's just a thing. He's a very good player. He also won one of the weakest MVPs we've ever seen. It's outrageous. The whining is outrageous.
Coming into the season, Nikola Jokic had a lot to gain from making the finals and winning a championship. As up to this point, a lot of the media, they were anti-Jokic and didn't think he could win a championship as the number one guy. But looking at the playoffs so far, a lot of those narratives have been wiped away, as Denver up to this point is breezing through the competition. And with Jokic playing so phenomenal, Denver being so dominant, I've seen fans, the media, moving the goalpost ever so slightly. As coming into the playoffs, Denver, in my personal opinion, was the favorites to win the West. But for the majority of the media and fans, they were not the favorites. As before the playoffs started, it went from Denver, they're not the biggest threat in the West, till now, they didn't play anyone in the West. That right there is a telltale sign the media and people who doubted Jokic are getting very, very nervous. As at this point, you can't deny his play or how good Denver is. But what you can do is downplay his competition. And look, in the first round versus Minnesota, I don't think that team was great by any means. But in the play-in tournament, minus Rudy Gobert, it nearly beat LA on the road. And looking at the Phoenix series, going into a Denver was the underdogs according to bettors. And looking at ESPN, their so-called experts picked Phoenix to win heavily. And to give you guys some context, Phoenix at that point with Kevin Durant was 12-1 post the trade. And according to many, the KD Suns were the favorites to make the finals and win it. And of course, in the West Finals versus Los Angeles, the media's narratives once again were totally dismantled. But after Jokic swept that team, it's, well, LeBron was old, Anthony Davis, he's always hurt, and they were a play-in team. That wasn't the energy before the series started. Only after they were swept did the narrative change and shift to downplay Jokic. And if you guys ask, why am I so critical of the NBA media and their downplaying of Jokic? It's because for 2.5 years, ad nauseum, I've heard these weak narratives about him as a player and as a teammate. And it's actually pretty amazing and even sad to see reporters and analysts who get paid to watch basketball and cover it, now all of a sudden have an epiphany that Jokic, the two-time MVP, is a pretty damn good player. And if you're new to the NBA and basketball, only 2 years ago Jokic was getting critiqued like very few players I've ever seen. As after an All-Star game, yes, an All-Star game, Nikola Jokic was getting grilled by the media. Why, you ask? Because in the fourth quarter, he didn't play and was quote-unquote benched. According to the NBA experts, this was proof Jokic wasn't a top player, a great player, or an MVP. Because of course we all know in an All-Star game, that's when players go all out, try their toughest, and go balls to the wall. Forget the playoffs, the real superstars come out at All-Star games. And look, for me personally, a couple years ago, I wasn't a big fan of Jokic. I knew how good he was. But seeing how the media treated him, that by proxy made me a Nuggets fan and a Jokic supporter. And for all these analysts now who are having this grand awakening how good Jokic is, look at this comparison. On your left, you have player A, averaging a 30-point triple-double in this year's playoffs. Player B, from last year's playoffs, averaged 31 points per game on 58% shooting. These two players are actually the same person, that being Jokic this year and Jokic last year. My point being, acting like Jokic somehow this year, out of nowhere, become a dominant playoff performer, shows you haven't been watching basketball or paying attention. And the rich irony for the NBA media, people like Joy Taylor, Nick Wright, even Shannon Sharp, one of their big-time arguments for Embiid being MVP is Jokic in the playoffs wasn't nearly as successful as he could be. Why that's ironic is because Joel Embiid, 1, he's sitting at home now, and 2, has never been to the Eastern Conference Finals in his entire career. The mind-boggling logic of the NBA media to not give Jokic MVP. Looking back on it, it's one of the worst picks of all time. And when it comes to Embiid, I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but again, this guy won a sympathy MVP where he basically cried to the voters for 2 solid years. And if Jokic in this year's finals goes off, wins that MVP, Embiid's MVP this year is going to age as bad as David Robinson winning in 1995 over Hakeem. And looking at Jokic as an individual player this year, the way he's playing reminds me of Kevin McHale talking about Larry Bird. As what McHale said is that Bird, with only 5 to 7 shots, could dominate the game and be the best player by far. We all get caught up in the Jordans, the Kobes, the Iversons, the great scorers who go for 40, even 50 points. But Nikola Jokic, like Bird and Magic, once again shows you there's many ways to be a great player and to dominate this game. As what we're witnessing is truly one of the best players of all time who makes his teammates better in nearly all aspects. As in Game 1 versus the Heat, his mere presence on the court, just setting screens, rolling to the rim, terrified defense. If there was some advanced stat for points generated off fear, Jokic in that category would be number 1 by far. And of course, being compared to Larry Bird, it's kind of a cliche to white dudes can pass, they're highly efficient, but another similarity is both Bird and Jokic had a great running mate. As Murray in this year's playoffs has been just lights out phenomenal, averaging 27.6 points, 6.4 assists, 5.5 boards, are nearly 50-40-90 splits. If you look at since 2019, the Jokic and Murray duo, when healthy you could argue they're the best duo in the NBA. As since 2019, they are by far the highest scoring duo in the playoffs at just under 53 points. And while that duo is fantastic, of course the guy who makes them go is Jokic. And versus elite defense, elite defensive players, nobody can stop this dude at his peak. As Anthony Davis and the Lakers, one of the top defenses post-trade, he made them look silly in nearly every game. As an AD guarded him for the series, here's Jokic's stats. 44 points, 25 assists, only 2 turnovers on above 50% shooting. There's not a single defensive scheme, defensive player, or defensive coach who can stop Jokic. That's been true this year, last year, and the year before that. And looking at the NBA Finals, it's only been one game, not going to overreact, but seeing Cody Zeller, yes, that Cody Zeller guard Jokic, it's barbecue chicken every single time. Even versus Bam, the size difference is just too much to overcome. And seeing that mismatch on offense, I don't think this series goes past 6 games, and realistically Denver should win in 5. As the only way they lose this series is they beat themselves with unforced errors. And for a coach like Eric Spoelstra, who is an all-time great coach, versus Denver, the personnel simply isn't there to make any major adjustments. And I thought Jokic in Game 1 really paced himself, as in the first half, he barely took one shot for the majority of the half. And despite that, Denver was up by 20 and firing on all cylinders. Compared to the West Finals, where in some games Jokic came out really aggressive, really hard, but in the fourth quarter was kind of gas. And speaking of fourth quarter play, both Murray and Jokic have been elite this postseason, with Jokic being 5th in points and Murray being 4th. Of course, Jokic has phenomenal splits, 50% from the field, 30 from 3, and 83 from the line, with a plus-minus of plus 3.5. Long story short, we are witnessing one of the best bigs of all time, best passing players period, one of the best offensive players of my lifetime. And it's so great finally Jokic has a healthy team in his prime that he can take the promised land and win a championship. And yes, the results are what I expected, but the way he's done it so far is still shocking and just mind-boggling. So, as always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoy it. The NBA media once again was wrong about Jokic, his Nuggets team, at nearly every turn. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.